This weekend, the Beast at Kings Island, it celebrates its 45th anniversary. Hello, everyone. Alongside Ryan Sir, I'm Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.
Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans, because that's who we are and that's who we care about. 45 years, Don.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe. I still remember, my first ride on the Beast, vividly, as a lot of people, do. And it's hard to believe that that was 45 years ago. But it's a ride that has withstood the test of time. It became instantly Kings Island's, signature attraction. People came from all over the world to ride it. And here we are 45 years later. They put in a lot of other great rides since then, but it's still the Beast that is the primary draw.
Yeah, and we've got a special guest today. John, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us how you're tied to the Beast?
Well,
John
John?
Keeter. Oh, okay. I will introduce myself. How about that? I'm John Keeter, and I am nothing more than a Kings Island fanatic. I have been going to the park for about 40 years now, just shy. And over the years, I've made a lot of friends there, and ultimately ended up for their 50th anniversary. I co-authored a book, Photographic Journey, through Kings Island's first 50 years. And yeah, and my connection to the Beast in particular was, let's see here. So it's its 45th. So 25 years ago, I was working on the Beast crew. So I have a little personal connection there, having spent some hard labor days working the Beast.
Yeah, so tell us about some of your stories about working on the Beast.
Well, it's funny because I was a little long in the tooth to be working there compared to most of my comrades. I was 28 years old. I had a full-time job, lived in Cincinnati, had moved there from Virginia years prior, always was just obsessed with Kings Island. It's one of the reasons I moved to Cincinnati. And so I had been working there for a number of years. Finally, my job allowed me some extra time on weekends. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to see if I can work weekends at Kings Island. Started there in 98, and I worked weekends on Flight of Fear. And then the very next year, they asked me to come back, and they said, where do you want to go? And I said, of course I want to work on the Beast. So for the Beast 20th anniversary season, I was on the crew that year. So that was kind of my introduction to, I tell everybody I paid my dues. I paid the Beast back for all the years of enjoyment I had prior to that. But I also say it was the hardest labor I ever did, and I have the bad back to prove it too.
Yeah,
you know,
John. Let's talk about all those years enjoying the Beast. Do you remember the first time you came face to face with the Beast as a writer?
I do. I do. Again, having not lived in Virginia, I would go visit my sister in the summertime and spend time with her. She lived in the Cincinnati area, and every year we would go to Kings Island when we'd visit. And like I said, I was obsessed, but I was afraid of roller coasters for years. And I did not actually ride the Beast until probably 83, 84. So it was running a couple years before I finally worked up the nerve to get on it. And it it's so silly to say this, but I have other enthusiast friends that say the same thing. It really changed my life when it came to roller coasters. I didn't know what to expect. There was no YouTube back then. There was no internet. So literally you did not know what happened on the Beast past that first drop until you got on it. So that first time is my most memorable ride on the Beast.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, when I was on it, that I was probably 8 or 9 years old the first time I rode it, but the loud noise going through the tunnels, that was the part that scared me the most.
Yeah, it really shook me up. I was, I of course I didn't cry or get upset or anything like that. But when I got off of that, I was really shaken up because I thought that was terrifying. Most in particular, obviously, the enclosed helix. I thought for sure my
Mhm.
head was going to get chopped off on that thing. That was my reaction, and I thought I was so lucky to have survived it. I was, I don't know, 11, 12 years old. So, back then I just thought, that was crazy. I'll never get on that thing again. That was terrifying. And of course, I ran right back and got on it again. So the rest is history.
Yeah, you talk about going through the helix being enclosed. My first ride on it in 1979, it wasn't enclosed. And all I saw was just all this wood and everything just come flying at me going through there. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah. So, John, the Beast has been, it's been rocking it for 45 years, but the ride that we have now is not identical to the ride that opened in 1979. There's been a lot of upgrades and changes and so on. From your standpoint, can you talk about some of the changes that have happened to the Beast over the past 45 years and how it's affected the ride experience?
Sure. Well, if my recollection is accurate, the first time I rode it, it still had the buzz bars. Don will have to tell me exactly when they switched out the buzz bars, but I remember riding with the buzz bars. And for those that may not know what a buzz bar is, it was literally just a bar that went across both seats, and it flipped down and it would buzz when it would pop open to get out of the train. There were no seat dividers, and I don't remember headrests. There might have been headrests, but
Not until 86.
yeah, so there you go. So there were no headrests. So the trains were remarkably different. There was no orange, individual lap bar. There were no seat belts. I'm trying to think what else that first time in terms of the trains themselves. I know a couple years later, the headrest came on. I think that was one of the first changes they really made to the headrest. And the headrest initially had holes in them. They were open in the back. So, of course, now they're like covered in Naugahyde or something like that. But the first headrests they put on there were open air. I guess they thought it would maybe help it be more aerodynamic or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that was just
But
the kind of design that they had back in '86. But you talked about the buzz bars. Uh, After the 1990 season is when that switch from buzz bars going into '91 with the individual lap bars. I remember after Labor Day that year, 1990, both the Racer and the Beast, they had one car where they were experimenting with the individual lap bars. So they had, you could see the transition was happening with that. But yeah, definitely, you're right. A totally different ride experience with the way the trains were. But also, John, that first year, uh, the cars, they were 4 bench rather than 3.
right, right. And I learned when I worked there, because I always wondered going there and riding the Beast, why the queue stall gates to get on the ride were off. They never matched up to the seats. And I could never understand that as a novice. And then when I worked there, I found out that's because they did make that change from the 4-seaters down to the 3-bench trains. And when they made that change, it misaligned the queue gates. So rather than redo them, they painted arrows on the floor saying, this is where you go, to get your seat. So that's why when you get further back in the train, the queue gates are off.
Yeah, and some changes too, just with the queue, the way you enter the ride. I mean, there's been several different ways that you enter and exit the ride, right?
Right. Absolutely. You used to enter into what's now a closed off area. And I don't know, Don, if you remember, but they had a little hut out there in that plaza, and it was called the Beast Tamer Photo. So years before they ever did on ride photos, you could go and stand there and take your picture in front of this big Beast logo that was in this hut, and get your picture. I called it the Beast Tamer Photo. So that was something I remember. And of course, you entered now, like I said, in that sealed off area. And when you exited the ride, you didn't exit the same path that you do now. You would actually exit and go back under the station. I think they use it now for fast lane or something, access like that. But that was the original entrance to the ride.
Yeah, when you would right now, if anyone's ever done the behind the scene tours of the Beast, you go behind the gate. That used to be the area that you would exit the ride when it first opened, and they had the little merch carts and things out there. Off to the other side, was the Keelboat Canal right over there. So yeah, it's definitely had some changes in that respect. But another thing that always comes up I'll see, people who, took their first ever beast ride in maybe 2019, and they'll say, oh, they ruined the ride, by putting all these brakes on. Talk about that.
Brakes have always been there. People argue that they haven't, but those brakes have been there since day one. As far as I understand, they only ran it a couple times in testing phases without brakes, but from day one, it had skid brakes originally. And then back in Paramount days, they made a switch to magnetic and pinch brakes. Now, when I operated the ride, it still had the skid brakes. So, but yeah, it's always been braked. And I will tell you a fun story about the skid brakes that, I observed it firsthand when I worked there. So I worked there in 99. It still had the skid brakes on the first drop, and in the mid-course, brake run, it was skids. And of course, dropping down into the final helix, it was skids. And when I say skids, for those that may not know, skids were hydraulic brakes that would automatically raise. The hydraulics were set so that the brakes were always in an up position. And literally they skim the bottom of the train, and that's what would slow it down. So they would rub up against the bottom of the train to slow the speed. Well, the beast being built when it was, there weren't, computers and technical electronics back then. And I'm sure Don can attest to this. So those skids were literally managed by a speedometer that was built into the beast. So the driver, in the operator's booth could check the speed of the trains going down the first drop. They had photo eyes, and it would tell you the speed. And maintenance would call up throughout the day to say, what's it running, because, the speed would increase as the ride warmed up, as the day went on. A hotter day, it ran a lot faster than on a colder day. So they were continually checking those. They would do hour intervals where they would call up to the station. We'd answer the phone and say, what's the speed? And we'd tell them the speeds, and we kept a log up on it. And if it was running just a little too fast, they'd go out. And literally under those skids built into the structure, there was a long wire that ran down from those skid brakes, and there was a paint bucket tied to the bottom of that wire. And they would go out there, and they had a big pile of washers and nuts and bolts, and literally they knew how many to grab. They had done it so often, and they would just put them in the paint bucket, and that would pull on that wire so it would lower the skid brakes. So, or they would take them out so that it would raise the skid brakes, and that's what would slow the train. So literally, that's how they gauged the speed of the beast back in the day when I worked on it in the years prior.
Yeah. So now looking on the screen, this is not the beast. This is from Knoebels, but that's an example of skid brakes, I believe, right there, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So for audio listeners, it's two, I guess, steel rails. Are they made of steel, John? Or Don, would you know?
The basic structure was wood, but then I think it had some sort of like metal plate on top of it.
Yeah, so it runs the length of the brake run, and then as John was mentioning, it's raised or lowered, and that's how much of a frictional coefficient it adds to it, and how much it slows down the train. So very, very cool. Yeah, they don't really do that too much anymore, but that's because of the PLCs and the all the fancy new technology that's out there now. But very, very cool.
Now, John, when the beast was first designed, the thought was they were going to run 4 trains. So can you explain why that didn't happen?
Oh, well, you might know that better than me. But I think it was just the blocking, right, Don? It was just
what I was told
with the blocks, and they were going to be shorter trains.
Right. What I was told was that with 4 trains, that they were actually going to have less capacity than they could get with 3 trains, just because you'd have 2 trains that would always be sitting there on the brake run, waiting to come back in, and they weren't really gaining anything by that.
Right.
So were they planning on adding the 4th train like later, or because I don't see them ordering 4 trains from PTC and then it being half built and then being just kidding. So did they Did they figure this out early on, or like
No,
how
all
did
four
that work?
trains were there,
Oh,
when
they
it
were.
first opened. Yeah, they were all there, and then there would always be one train that would be off for the day. That maintenance would just work on. It was always just, sitting over there in the storage area. You'd have the three trains on, but it was train 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then after, a couple years, they just decided, let's use that train for parts.
Okay. What happened to that train? Did it just get parted out ultimately?
Just all parts became parts. So
I know
parts of
what
those trains
happened.
may be in the, yeah. Go
I
ahead,
know
John.
what happened to one part of that train. And there's a good little story about it. I never had the privilege of meeting the lovely Ruth Voss. Don Helbig did. And Ruth Voss is kind of legendary. Her name is synonymous with the Beast. She was a wonderful woman, from what I understand, that worked at the park, and she did marketing and PR for the park. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you why Ruth Voss was such a wonderful person. Not only was she an expert at marketing and PR, she really branched or she reached across the enthusiast lines and kind of bridged coaster enthusiasts, specifically American coaster enthusiasts, ACE, and really kind of welcomed them with open arms to the park. And I think a lot of that, I think the reason she was so generous with enthusiasts and that sort of thing is Miss Voss, from what I understand, had a very giving and loving heart. And, she, going back to even before her tenure at Kings Island, I mean, the woman was incredible what she achieved in her life. She met with President Nixon, and she developed a home for underprivileged girls that's still in existence there, in Cincinnati. And she really championed for people, and I think that translated when she worked at Kings Island, and she loved Kings Island. And of course, Don can speak to this more than I, but when the Beast was open, she was the one that invited Ace there and wanted Ace members there to ride the Beast and enjoy the Beast. And she started something called the Ace Walk Back, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But she unfortunately suffered from arthritis, and many people have heard this story. And so she always claimed that when she rode the Beast, she would ride it every morning, that it loosened her up, it loosened her joints. And over the years, she began, inviting people to walk back with her. Now, upon her retirement, because ultimately her health, took a turn in the 90s, and she retired from Kings Island. And as a surprise to her, as one of her parting gifts, they delivered one of the front Beast cars to her home so she could have it, so that she could be near her beloved Beast every day of her life. So that's the Ruth Voss car story.
And that car is still in the family. I still keep in touch. Every now and then I'll hear from one of her sons, and it's very much still in the family.
Yep.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Beast walk back, and it sounded like you wanted to talk about that next. So we'll do what you want to do. Totally kidding. So that's it's reaching 45 years, and it's going to be commemorated at the ACE Spring Conference this May 17th to the 19th. As an ACE member, what do you remember about the Beast walk back?
What I remember is undoubtedly the people I met. It wasn't the rides, yeah, you got to go back there and you got to ride the ride before the public and that sort of thing. But once you've ridden it a couple times or done the walk back a couple times, it wasn't about riding the ride. It was, who's going to show up today? What ACE member am I going to see? What new friend am I going to make? I made friends from all over the world at that walk back. You would gather at a certain spot there for a while during the Paramount days. They had a plaque that was embedded in the concrete, and that was on International Street, and you'd meet there. Prior to that, you would just kind of gather in a certain spot in front of one of the gift shops. And a member of guest services, which, like I said, originally it started by Ruth Voss, they would meet you there prior to opening, about, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes prior to the park opening the rides, and they would walk you back, and they would take you a very unique way to get back to the Beast. They wouldn't just take you down the main midways. They'd kind of cut through some back areas just so you could see some behind the scenes stuff, but they'd take you there, walk you up the main entrance, and you'd get to ride before anybody else. And, you know, I have pictures of friends and me and, you know, just hanging out, waiting for the person that was doing the walk back that morning to come greet us. And I can't even tell you how many people I met and am still friends with today because of that.
Yeah, John,
Absolutely.
I'm just like you. I met hundreds of people, hundreds, doing the Ace Walk back, and uh, that plaque that you're showing right there now,
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, for our viewers that are watching the video version, I have that plaque. Uh, Holds a lot of a lot of memories for me, a lot of people that I met. And you're right, John. It wasn't just about being able to get that first ride of the day. Occasionally you would get two before the public got back there, but it was about just meeting other Ace members, hearing their stories about their favorite coasters, and just the camaraderie. Just everybody just gathered that morning, just talking and just having a great time before the park even opened.
Mm-hmm. John, did you ever encounter any celebrities while riding the Beast?
I did. A number of them. I was driving the Beast when Britney Spears rode it. I was also operating the Beast when the Backstreet Boys rode it. I had the pleasure of checking the lap bar of John Ritter, of all people.
Heck yeah.
And of course, Montel Williams.
Mm-hmm.
He would come right in. Reds players. You would see a lot of like Bengals players, Reds players, and they were a little more incognito. People didn't recognize them. But the story is, when I would work there, of course, they had that phone right outside the operator's booth, and they would call up. And because, Kings Island has perimeter roads around it. So they would drive a lot of the bigger name celebrities around in, vans, parked vans, and, around that perimeter road. So we'd get a call, and there was a code. I can't remember the code they'd give us, but we knew by that code that it was celebrity, that there was somebody coming. They would tell us, hold a train or hold how, X amount of seats, and we would hold it for them. And they'd come up right up those back stairs on the exit side and walk right up there, and we'd have a seat ready for them, and they'd ride it. But I will tell you, a lot of it depended on who was playing Timberwolf at the time. If there was a concert at Timberwolf, you were guaranteed to see that performer at the Beast that day.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, I got a story about that too. Ruth Voss would often, be part of the group that would escort some of the different acts that were going to play at Timberwolf back to the Beast. And there was one morning that a group that was going to be performing there was brought back to join the Ace members, and I didn't know who the person was, and they asked me. I heard their name, but I didn't recognize them, and they said, "Are you going to the concert tonight?" And I said, I'm not paying $12.95 to watch James Taylor. It was James Taylor. So and Ruth is like, honey, you got to be careful what you say to me. But he thought I was kidding. He took it as a joke, thought I was joking, but I was serious. I didn't recognize him. I was, into my own little world there, coasters and sports and everything, and didn't pick up. But you're right. I mean, there would always be somebody back there at the Beast if there was a Timberwolf, concert, or like you said, different Reds and Bengals. I would recognize the Reds and Bengals being a sports fan all the time. I remember Cesar Cedeno riding the Beast. He played for the Reds in 1982, and but yeah, just a lot of recognizable. Lou Ferrigno was another one that I remember being taken back to ride the Beast. So yeah.
Anytime I see somebody that's over 350 pounds with 2% body fat, I assume they're a Bengal. Awesome.
Well,
John,
sometimes they'd have an entourage, and they'd tell us, like, I don't know, hold 10 seats, because it wouldn't just be, I don't know, Britney Spears. It would be Britney Spears plus her entire crew. And, you were torn because you would have to tell the people in the station, sorry, you got to wait an extra train. And that didn't fly sometimes. Sometimes those people didn't give a flip about whether it was Britney Spears or John Ritter or whoever. They were like, wait a minute, somebody's cutting me in line, And it was funny because we'd hold the train and you would see it dawn on them, kind of, because you wouldn't tell them that a celebrity was coming. It's just you'd escort them up there, and you could kind of see the recognition come across the faces, like, oh, but a lot of the guests didn't like it when you would hold seats like that.
John, the American Coaster Enthusiasts are going to have their spring conference there in May, 17th through the 19th. We touched on the Ace Walk Back. The anniversary of that was May 19th, back in 1979 when that was introduced. So they're going to commemorate that a little bit. But night rides, the first couple of nights, the nighttime ERT includes the Beast in that lineup. Talk about the night ride experience on the Beast. I mean, what makes it so special?
Oh, to this day, it's still unrivaled, in my opinion. I'll talk about it from two aspects. As a writer, it still amazes me. And the things that stand out to me is, for some reason, it must be a perspective thing, but it just seems like it's faster at night. It's not. And having worked there, I know that they're regulating the speed of that ride, but it just feels faster. Also, I love that point where, it's the lowest point of the track prior to, hitting the curve before lift number 2. There's a temperature change. There's a dramatic temperature change that happens. And on the right night, a really hot, steamy summer night, when you get back there, it feels like it drops 10 degrees back there. And then, of course, their choice in not lighting the Helix tunnel at the end at night, that's just pandemonium. You kind of get some glimpses of moonlight flickering through the boards, the cracks in the boards as you go through there. So it's a strobe effect. But really and truly, there's not really any other coaster that compares to it when it comes to night rides from, my experience, my personal opinion. Now, having worked there, that's when we were the busiest, is nighttime, because everybody wanted that last ride to be the Beast. So working on the Beast back in the day, I assume it's still the same way. We would stay there until the wee hours of the morning. The Beast crew was there later typically than any other ride crew in the park, because we were busy running up the line. As long as you were in line by the time the fireworks went off, you got to ride it. So there were some Saturday and Sunday nights we were there until 1:30, and 2 in the morning sometimes. And there was an electricity at night in that station that made you enjoy, even though it was hard work and you wanted to go home, you enjoyed it because it was electric, and people would chant and scream and yell, and the station just came alive, with the guests. So those were great memories.
Absolutely. Well, John, we really appreciate you coming back on the show. Are we going to see you around the park this year?
Of course. Yeah, you're even when I'm old and gray and can't ride anymore, so I'm still going to pay somebody to push me around the park. I'll be a Kings Island addict for as long as I can, and more than likely you'll see me riding the Beast. How about that?
Awesome. Well, again, the Beast turns 45, so April 13th. So it was Friday, April 13th of 1979. That was Media Day, right?
That was Media Day, correct.
So
rainy Media Day.
A rainy Media Day. The Beast was unchained. So as of the release of this episode, that's going to be tomorrow. So it'll be Saturday, April 13th, 2024 is the actual 45th anniversary of the Beast. So next week, when Kings Island opens for the 2024 season, make sure you give the Beast a good old lap to say hi for the season and to congratulate on 45 years of being one of the greatest roller coasters to ever exist. John, thank you so much again.